Welcome to Quilting's first reality show, live and unscripted with Susan Smith.
And a huge thanks to our son, Will, who does these little intro clips for me in various different voices. That's kind of the James Bond, or maybe the Sean Connery one. So that's always fun. Also, I want to take a moment to give a thank you here to my husband, Dave, who's behind the scenes running all the cameras and wires and monitors and stuff. And also our good friend, Dan, who provides the guitar music that you hear throughout my episodes. So appreciate all those things. All right. Once again, I am Susan Smith. You are in my studio, Stitched by Susan. This is a live and unscripted episode. And in these episodes, I generally quilt a whole project from start to finish. And it's not a formal class by any means. I'm just inviting you into my studio while I work, kind of watch over my shoulder and see how I do things. It's not the only way, might not even be the right way, just the way that I do things. So tonight we're working on a small quilt that is a sample project from the Fat Quarter Shop, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And it is with a pattern and fabric line that are coming out in September. So we'll put links, in fact, I've already put links in the show notes for that kit. If you're interested in purchasing it, you'll see when we get to it. It's a quite simple pattern, so really suitable for a beginner. And I'm going to use it tonight with some fairly simple ruler work quilting. So it's not freehand per se, which is what I often do, but it will be fairly simple ruler work, still very soft, not too fussy quilting at all. So the way this works is that I begin by loading the quilt, go through all the quilting, and kind of talk my way through the decisions and processes and choices as I go, and you can just pick up things while we're in there. So before I dive into loading, let's talk about just a couple of things. One is, if you enjoy this episode and find something useful in it, I would love if you would like and subscribe. And also, if you click on the bell, you'll get notifications whenever I'm going live. And please do feel free to share it with any friends of yours who you think would enjoy it as well. Someone asked a little earlier, we were in the pre-show kind of chatting, and someone asked, do you have coffee in the evenings? Because you regular watchers will know I usually have my mug of coffee in my hand, but it's usually morning. So this evening I actually have water. I'm being a good girl. However, if you're interested in supporting this show, you can do that easily at buymeacoffee.com/Stitched by Susan. There you can make a contribution as little as $5, or if you wish, you can sign up for a monthly subscription. That is entirely up to you. So we really appreciate those of you who have and continue to contribute. That enables us to expand our cameras and our electronic equipment and our streaming software and all the things. So you are the reason that we keep getting a more and more polished show. That's where all of those dollars go. We appreciate them. Also, if you do quite a lot of quilting and sewing or things that occupy your hands but not necessarily your mind, I also have a podcast, and it is called Measure Twice, Cut Once, and a new episode comes out every Wednesday, so there was a new one today. And most of them are interview-based. It's me talking with other crafters, a lot of quilters, and it's just casual stories and sharing with each other. So you can find that at podcast.stitchedbysusan.com. Have I covered everything? I think so. Let us start to load, and I will introduce the long arm to you then as we get going. I'm just going to push Lucy off to the side, and we're going to start loading. So here's my gorgeous backing. I'm not sure if you can see super clearly on camera, but there's kind of a crosshatch going on in the fabric of this backing. Can you see that? So I didn't even realize that until I laid it out on my long arm. I had already planned my quilting just looking at the top of the quilt. But as I do the quilting and when I post photos later on, you'll see they just tie perfectly together. So when I load a backing, I have some shortcuts. I should make clear I'm not taking shortcuts because I'm all about saving time. I'm about quality, but I also quilt as my day job. And so it's important to me that I'm efficient with the things that I do. So this is based on a video of a loading system that I saw from a lady called Loading Lori's Way, I believe, some years back. And I've kind of adapted it and made it my own. And it is slick. You will see. So I'm using the red snapper system as well, which means that there's a little rod in this leader, and my large rod just clamps the edge of this quilt in place super quick. So this front edge close to me is a selvage, so I know that it's perfectly straight. So I'm just lining it up with the hem of my leader, snapping it into place. So that's the front end done. And now I'll walk around to the other side of the machine and pull all the rest of that backing smoothly down. I never know whether to call this the front or the back of the machine. The far side of it, at any rate. And this is really important. Let me see, can this edge be seen? A little bit, if I get out of the way. Can you see that on this edge, there's a little jog where the seam is? That happens so often with the backing. And with my loading method, that doesn't matter at all. And as you can see, I have not ironed it either. There are still creases in it. That doesn't matter either. So I'm pulling the whole backing smoothly over the quilting rail. And what I have to be really sure of is that it's not shifting to one side or the other. Watch if I pull it a little bit. You start to get these diagonal kind of wrinkles going on. That's how you know it's not straight. So that's the important part, is to get it smooth and straight all the way down this back side of the long arm. At that point, I'm going to get my trusty water spray bottle and mist it a little. And that is instead of ironing. And all the creases, this has been folded, it's been shipped to me, folded in a box for several days. And all those creases are going to relax beautifully right out of this backing. Now I've come back around to the quilting side of the machine and I'm just pulling it on smoothly and straight. And basically that friction of the fabric passing over the leader is what's holding it smooth and taut. And I'm watching from underneath till I see the end of my backing approaching the end of my leader. Then I'll stop rolling and run around and clip that side. And it's just that quick. If necessary, I give it one more smooth. And I see there's just a couple wrinkles here I can feel. They're not very moist, so I'm just going to give them a little bit more mist of just water. I absolutely love the red snapper system, but the truth is you can load this same way even if you're using pins. But the same method of pulling the fabric over the leader to keep it straight. All right, do the last little bit of rolling. And just like that, we have a quilt back ready to go. All right, batting is next. And I'm going to be using Hobbs 80-20. So it's 80% cotton, 20% polyester. So the cotton makes it has that little bit of shrinkage, kind of like traditional all cotton batting does, so that you get that wrinkled kind of traditional quilt look. And the 20% poly gives it a wee bit more loft and also helps to minimize creases from folding the quilt and storing it. So this is my favorite go-to batting. And here's our little quilt. There's your first look at it. So this quilt pattern, as I mentioned, is a sample for the Fat Quarter Shop. The pattern's name is Fair and Square. The fabric line, which is just coming out in September, is called Isabella, and it's by Moda, and the designer is Angel. And Dave has made a live link now, I think in the comments, yes? For the kit, and you'll see Fair and Square in that kind of URL. And that is for the kit if you wish to purchase it. It comes in the form, I believe, of a Jolly Bar, and that's like a 10-inch layer cake but cut in half. So all the different fabrics, but 10 inches by 5. That's my understanding. So it's just a very little bit traditional type of fabrics and prints, a little bit reminiscent of 30s, some of them, a little bit of Americana. There's some flags and things in it. It's very pretty. All right. So this is Lucy the Long Arm. I'm sewing on a Gamble Elevate. And what I'm doing now is just basting the side of the quilt in place. And forgive me, I'm going to grab a drink of water for a second. I feel a little bit of a tickle in my throat coming on. All right, and while I baste, Dave is reminding me too, I will stop a couple times throughout this process and take some questions. If you could type a Q in front of your question, that would really help us, because there's apt to be a lot of comments, and then we can search for them, search for the questions in particular with that Q. So all I'm doing here is basting within the 1/4 inch seam allowance along the edge of the quilt. This helps hold everything in place, and it also establishes my quilt being square. So my machine, not everyone does, but my machine has something called channel locks. They're magnetic, and so I can snap them in place, and now I'm able to quilt a perfectly horizontal line, and that's a really easy way for me to be able to square up quilts. If you don't have that, you might have to do a little measuring beforehand and pin in place. But you can always use this top leader edge as a guideline too for keeping it quite straight. You can also do this with a larger basting stitch. I just don't take the time to change the stitch length. I do it in the same one I'm stitching in, which happens to be 14. And now I've taken my horizontal lock off and put my vertical one on. So now I know I have a perfectly 90-degree corner, and I'm literally adjusting my fabric to fit in with that straight line of stitching, because I know that it is straight and square. That's it. So we are basted and nearly ready to get started quilting. I'm going to load the ruler plate on, and if there are any questions, this is a good moment to be throwing them up. The ruler plate in most long arm machines just snaps on in some way and provides a little wider work area for you to rest a ruler upon. Mine is probably noisy because it's metal. It's not a delicate process putting it on. So it gives me like a little work table for my ruler to rest on. Okay, have we questions? Just one question? Wow. Joanne, I've read that there's a right and wrong side to batting. Which side goes face up against your quilt? I think that depends on your batting type, Joanne. I've heard that too for warm and natural. But for the Hobbs 80/20, I don't think that it matters. There's no scrim on it, so I don't think that it matters. At any rate, I use them both. So I'm going to grab another sip of water and my glasses, and we're going to get to it. All right. So I mentioned in the show notes that we are going to be quilting a variation on a crosshatch. There's just a few sewing threads on here, which I'm nabbing before I go on. So that is indeed what we're doing. One more thing. See, I get busy talking sometimes, you guys. I need to put my side clamps on. So I have basted side 1, side 2, and side 3 of the quilt. These little side clamps, these are also the red snapper system. And they just put a little gentle tension on the edges of the quilt and keep that backing from rumpling up at all underneath. I love these clamps because they're long in this area as opposed to one pulling here and one pulling nearer the bottom. You'll see it on this side when I put it on as well. So, you know, there are other brands too that have long clamps. I just happen to get these with my red snappers, but I do love a long clamp for the way that it grips. And there's just very gentle tension on that. And then lastly, this front edge of the quilt, and I know Lucy's sitting in the way a little bit, this front edge needs to be held in place too. And the way I do that is just with these magnets. So my top and my batting are actually floating, meaning they're just hanging down here in front of me toward the floor. But I don't want them to pull up, to migrate upwards as I'm quilting. So that's what these magnetic bars do. So now all four sides of my quilted area are really secure. They're not moving anywhere. And now I can work freely. Okay, apparently there are a few more questions. Let's go ahead and take them before I dive right in. Donna, what is the name of your ruler? There is a... I'm second guessing myself. There will be a list in the show notes, but I'll tell you quickly. It's by A1, and it's a 9-inch straight ruler. And what I love best is the handle. So again, kind of like the clamps. There you can see the end. I'm not stuck on a particular brand, but I think you need something to hang on to. It enables you to grip it in different ways as you're quilting and really saves your hand some fatigue. Love this little ruler. Rachel, can the ruler plate be installed before basting? Absolutely it can. I know quilters who never take their ruler plate off. I do because it shortens up my available space because it bumps against the rails. That's personal preference. Peggy, where do you get the magnetic bars? Any hardware store will have them. They're just the type that you might see in a garage with tools hanging or in a kitchen with knives hanging. Very simple, very inexpensive. Got to make sure you have a magnetic bar, of course. And Nancy is asking, where do you get the clamps? Dave is saying he added a link to the resource page. In my regular Live and Unscripted, I just have a series of links that go on every one. Today, because it's a special one that we uploaded, we haven't got that in yet, and I apologize. I'm kind of a one-woman show here, and so I didn't get that in, but I'll go back and add it afterwards. So my favorite, you know, marking tools, rulers, iron, all the things are all in there. Oh, still one more, sorry. Julianne, I see you have spirals in the quilt at the wall. I struggle with spirals and circles in general. Any special tip, or is it just practicing over and over that will make them look better? I do have tips, and it is practice, but that's probably a speech for another day because that will go a little bit longer. Someone was asking about the quilt earlier, and I will say this. It is my original design. There is no pattern for it, and it is completely out of my scrap basket. And it was very fun making all those flying geese. So I have not pre-marked any of this quilt. I am literally going to quilt from point to point of the sewn lines. I'm going to determine about how far down I can quilt because of my front rail. And then I'm literally going to zigzag up and down and back and forth till I have the crosshatch quilted in this whole area that is currently exposed. Rather than rolling back and forth and trying to make long, long, long continuous lines, you'll see how this comes together as we keep going. Okay, in just a moment, there's a few sewing threads poking through the seams here. I will have to catch them whenever I see them. I learned this the hard way. It's one thing to pull fabric threads, to just pull them off, but when there are sewing threads, you daren't just pull. You've got to stop and cut. So this is a 9-inch ruler, which is not quite reaching from corner to corner of my blocks, but I choose to stay with the smaller one because my hand can manage it better. When the ruler gets too long, it can be easy to sort of lose control of it and have it get a little bit floppy. So I prefer to stick with the shorter one, even if I have to move it a little oftener. I'm okay with that. Okay, I'm just going to quietly quilt for a few minutes so that I'm sure to get this first set of lines in the right places as I've planned them, because I'm not quilting on every set of points. You'll see as this comes together. Okay, we'll add some nice music for you. And we'll just head down and get some quilting done. So at the bottom of my row, I'm just pausing with my needle right at the point of that seam at the bottom so that I have a nice crisp corner. And then when I advance my quilt to the next pass, it will meet up beautifully. Sometimes I just have to pause and take a look. Recalculating, as the GPS says. Now where am I going next? No shame in pausing. Another sewing thread. And you can tell they're sewing threads because when you do tug on them a little, they are firmly anchored. And you do not want to just yank them out. there, folks. I made a little oops. I'll show you here in just a second. So this was the end of my line of blocks and where my points should be ending, and I inadvertently went through it. And of course I can't come any further forward because of my front edge of Lucy, so I just have to backtrack for a couple seconds. Probably a good time, Dave, if you wish, to throw a couple questions up, and I will, well, I can look up. Oh, apparently there's lots of questions. Probably a good time for them then. I'll pause there for a moment. Bonnie, while using rulers, what mode are you in, manual or cruise? I am in regulate at the moment. I do have a coast regulate on my machine. I just don't use it very often. So coast regulate just means that even when my machine is stopped, the needle will still be slowly going and then it will pick up the pace again. So if I just leave it on regulate, that needle just about pauses, and that's perfect for me when I'm at a point. So that's how I've got it. Jackie, I get thread breaking when going through pieced intersections. Should I try a larger needle? Yes, you probably should, and maybe a different size of thread. A great way to check that out is through your thread manufacturer. They'll often have recommendations for thread and needle size that work well together. If your thread's too large for your needle, for example, it will shred. Yeah, that's a good place to look for that answer. What foot are you using? A specific ruler foot? It is a ruler foot. Put out by Gamble. I pretty much just leave my ruler foot on. It's just 1/4 inch around the needle on all sides, so it's my favorite. Okay, I've joined a little late. How did you decide what designs or patterns you're going to quilt on this top? The crosshatch was chosen by Kimberly of the Fat Quarter Shop. That was what she wanted to go with, and I'm just putting my little variation spin on it. Otherwise, I have lots of tips and tricks. Again, longer conversation than we can have tonight about narrowing down your choices for what design to pick. Lauren, you make it look so easy. My first attempt a few weeks ago was a disaster. I did stitch in the ditch, which was a mistake for the first time. I like how you're just using the intersection points. Yes, cross-hatching like this is a great choice if you're just getting started using a ruler because it's pretty darn forgiving. Barbara, do you measure your quilt tops ahead of putting them on the frame? And if they're not square, what do you do differently? I measure them by eye. And Barbara, again, I've got other YouTube episodes where I've worked purposely on quilts that are unsquare. One of them is called the 1-inch, maybe it's the 2-inch minimizer. If you watch that one, I'll give some really specific tips on how to square up and how to decide what size to aim for. Karen, if you get a fabric thread between your batting and quilt top, how do you remove it if it's showing? There's a number of different ways for that. I have a special needle for it that's got, instead of an eye, it's got a rough end on it, and I can pull that thread out. Other people do it with very tiny crochet hooks. A couple different ways to approach that. Sharon, I'm noticing that you stop to adjust your ruler while the needle is in a seam. That makes so much sense. Yep, it's good camouflage. Okay, great. So I'm starting back up, and what I've done is undone my stitching to a seam intersection. For one thing, I'm right in front of the machine. For one thing, that helps to anchor my thread so that the stitches don't come open. They just hold tighter when they're through those several layers of fabric. And for another, I'm going to put 4 or 5 lock stitches really close together, overlapping that previous stitching. So all that would show a little bit if it was in solid plain fabric, but I've got it in a seam allowance and there's prints top and bottom. No one's ever going to find this, believe me. So I'm just going to back up about 2 stitches from where I ended and put a couple stitches in really close succession there. And I'll just leave my tails for a minute till I've gone on stitching. If you cut them close too early, they're apt to pull out. Stitch a little bit and then go back and cut those tails close too, and it's done. All right, now I've got to pay attention again so I'm sure to quilt in the right places, okay? If you're new to ruler work too, maybe you don't realize that there's no way around just working by eye to lay your ruler actually a 1/4 inch away from where you want to be quilting. So you learn to do that by eye because the hopper foot is 1/4 inch wide. Where your ruler is 1/4 inch from where the stitching is going to end up. As you can see, it does not always work to pause in a seam, but whenever I can, that is helpful for sure. A couple more threads we're picking up before we stitch them in. Even when you're stitching in a regulated mode, if you start and stop with a jerk, the machine can't regulate that rapidly. So I'm trying to do my starts and stops a bit gradually, much like you do in a car when you come to a stop sign. That helps to keep the stitches even length. And can you kind of see what I'm doing now? I'm stitching a thinner crosshatch on each side of my original one, a closer spaced one. And so then we'll have these kind of 3 lines crossing left and 3 lines crossing right with slightly larger squares between them. That will be the end result if all goes well. Can you hear that in my motor? I'm easing into those pauses. Zip, 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 and then slow down into that corner. Just have to keep looking to make sure where I'm going next. Inevitably, because we're working with fabric, quilts are not perfectly square. The points don't perfectly line up, but I find that I can adjust my ruler as I go. I'm sure you see me doing that. And when I release the quilt off the frame, no one will realize that some of my lines have a little bit of an angle or a little bit of a pivot to them. It's very gentle, and it looks just fine when the quilt is finished. Okay, have we got any? Oh, yeah, here's another one. There's still a couple more to catch. I don't know, do you talk to yourself when you're quilting? I find it can be really helpful. I get some good answers that way. I'm just looking over it very carefully. I am missing one. Are you guys seeing this? I'm missing one right along here, but I can't get down to this bottom edge yet. So I'm going to roll the quilt just a little, I think, so I can do that one more line. Or can I catch it on the next one? No, because I have to go all the way up the top. You guys are seeing me thinking out loud, truly. It has to extend all the way to the top, so I've got to find a way to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and advance the quilt. I just need about 1.5 inches more. And I may have to back it up when I get to the top edge to do this one long set of lines. Shift my magnets just a little. I did not fully map out how I was going to move around the quilt before I came on the show, so you're seeing me thinking on the fly, which is kind of how I work. So I'm able to quilt all the way to that upper edge. It's going to get a little tricky with the ruler, so I'm just going to have to reverse its direction for that top little bit, because there's simply not room above. And now I'll turn around. And this may be a little different for you. We probably all have different ways of holding our rulers, like we hold even our pens or pencils a little bit differently from each other. But this is what I love about rulers that have handles or something you can grip, is it really gives you options. All right, stepping back to take one more look. I think that's got it. I believe so. Awesome. All right, now I'm going to take off all my magnets, all my side clamps. Dave's going to load up some questions if indeed there are any, and I'll move Lucy out of the way. Again, if you're enjoying this and finding it helpful, I'd love if you'd like and subscribe to my channel. If you click on the little bell, you will then get notifications too whenever I do go live. Typically, these live and unscripted episodes are the first and third Friday of every month, and they're at 9 a.m. Pacific time. This is an extra little bonus one tucked in. So there are only 6 rows of blocks in the quilt. So that was a third of the quilting right there. We did 2 rows of blocks. Now again, this is not a show quilt, so I am eyeballing the straightness of it on these side lines. I will use my vertical channel lock again to make sure that I have straight stitching. But one thing that I try to be sure to do when I'm advancing my quilt is to grab both the top and the batting and give it a little tug. I find that naturally the batting tends to pull up a little bit in the middle. And so either as I did, you know, pinch and pull, or flip that quilt top right up. Make sure the batting is smooth. It's not kind of pulling into the middle or being stretched, and get that all in place smoothly. I've got a fair bit of linked in one area here. I keep a little sticky roller always handy. I do have a cat in the house. You know, I don't let him get on my quilts, but if you've got a pet, you know how that is. That darn cat hair just flies. So I keep a good sticky roller handy all the time. Okay. It's nice and square. Oh yes, questions. Gosh, don't let me forget. Let me get a sip. I love them. What is your actual quilting depth from back to front on Lucy? She has a 26-inch throat, and probably I can only quilt, I don't know, 23 or 24, because the throat does curve. And And generally I don't, because that's a really long arm's reach. But it is handy. Cases like this when you're trying to get one long line in, right? Sandal. I really appreciate the way you use examples from everyday life to describe the way you quilt. Thanks. Thanks. I try to do that. Make it relatable. Joanne, how do you know if you've rolled out your quilt enough or too much? Is there supposed to be some bounce to it or pretty tight? A quilter told me this one time, and this has been my measuring stick, and now I kind of do it by feel. But if you put your fingers underneath, we're going to look right here. If you put your fingers underneath, okay, and just grab, you should be able to grab your fingers. This should not be so tight that you could beat it like a drum. So if your fingers poke up and you can grab your fingers, there's enough leeway in there. It may look taut and smooth to you guys, but I've only tightened it enough to hold it smooth. There's not actually tension pulling on those seams. That is a recipe for tension problems, broken needles, depending on how severe it is. So I'm just going to baste the right side and the left, and then I know you all will help me remember to put my clamps on the front, right? Forgot to put my lock on. So again, my vertical channel lock makes this stitching line perfectly straight. Because there are quite a few seams, I'm kind of tucking it under my needle a little faster than it wants to go on its own. If you're not comfortable doing that, then by all means take a minute or two to pin it first. I don't recommend just stitching without doing anything to the fabric because it will end up pushing out in front of you. But you can see, use your seam lines. You know, if they're curving down at the edges, you know you've stretched that out of shape. They should all be straight up there, even and smooth. And I watch along my front rail too. If there are seam lines that run horizontally, I'm always watching that sort of thing. Is my quilt progressing straight? And there are more fiddly methods for doing that, for measuring, for making it perfect, that you might want to use for show quilts. But for this type of couch quilt or family quilt, I feel like eyeballing it is okay. You do what comfort level you have, what kind of perfection you're wanting to achieve. I'm pretty confident that my quilts are always within a 1/4 inch of square, maybe even an 1/8. So that hits my comfort level. Ticks that box. If you have a seam that is coming open just a little at this little edge, I just go over it a time or two with an extra basting stitch. That just gives it a little bit more security. All right, we're basted. Here come the magnetic clamps. This time I'm going to put them just a little higher. They were catching the buttons of my shirt. So I'm just going to tuck them out of the way. And these do come in different lengths, by the way. So I have 18-inch ones and 12-inch ones. Just for convenience, it doesn't really matter. This does seem like quite a lot of prep, in a way, for each advance of the quilt, but what this does is makes me 100% certain there will be no wrinkles on the backing of my quilt. And I like that assurance. And I still see some lint. Let's grab that. We do not want to quilt that in. Looks good. Okay, we're ready to start again. Where did I set down my ruler? Right there. So I'm going to go start at this little odd one that I quilted lower, because I feel like that might... I'm just thinking, bear with me while I think through this process. No, I'm going to start like I did the first row, going right through the center of the large block. And by block, I mean this red one, this pink one. Just because from point to point is very easy for me to visually identify where my line should be. So I'm going to start with that again. Even if I have to break thread again, that's okay. Not the end of the world. Better than having to unpick lines because I've quilted from the wrong point to points. So you're going to see here in a second how I'm meeting right up with the point of my last line. And if I can make them join right up, no one will ever know that I turned a corner there. And to my mind, this is far, far easier than advancing and rewinding the quilt to try and achieve, you know, the lines hitting in certain places. To try and achieve long, continuous lines. Sorry, I'm not saying that correctly. I'm thinking one thing and saying another, which is never wise, is it? I'll be quiet now and quilt. Again, getting these first lines established for sure in the right place. Every so often, the points of the sewing have not nested perfectly. And you know, when that happens, I just pick a spot. Trying to keep my long line as straight as I can, just pick a spot. No one will notice that in the end. If you're a piecer and you're worried because not every single point nested perfectly, please don't worry. Perfection is not a requirement. One more. And there I'm just traveling. Again, it's on that within the seam allowance of the outer edge that will all fall within the binding. I think I've got the hang of where I'm going enough to talk again for a moment. If you're just tuning in, this quilt is a sample for the Fat Quarter shop, and it's featuring a fabric line and pattern that are coming available in September. The fabric line is printed by Moda, and it's called Isabella, and the pattern is called Fair and Square. And somewhere in the chat window and also in the show notes, there is a link to the upcoming kit that will be available that includes both fabric and pattern. So again, that is with the Fat Quarter shop. Pardon me, I'm going to grab a sip of water again. I've had this nagging cough for a couple of weeks, and you know, when you got a cough, you just gotta. Hence the handy bottle of water. It really helps. I'm quite loving this. I've done lots of crosshatches before, but I've never done this kind of irregularly spaced one. I'm really, really loving it, and it suits this pattern beautifully. Just checking all the angles. Okay. So next Friday's Live and Unscripted, which I believe is the 20th of August, I am planning, and my plans are never in stone, it may change, but I'm planning to work on a quilt of my own, which is huge. And in another episode, I kind of took a poll of the quilters that were watching as to whether you would enjoy watching me do a larger project with less talking and just basically have the cameras on and just work, so that you really are seeing it at full speed, if you will. So there's no stopping for questions. There's no, I'm just getting it done. And you can kind of see how long it takes to do a quilt. So that's my current plan. It is a gorgeous quilt with a Tula Pink pattern and of course Tula Pink fabrics for line work, the black and white. So that is my current plan. And I believe it is 96 inches square. It's a big quilt. It is not going to be custom. I'm going to be quilting it with an all-over freehand design, for sure. think that was the last line. I'm just going to look back over it. Make sure my lines all fall in groupings of 3. I think so. I do not always break thread at the end. I will often just put the needle down and advance the quilt, but for the purposes of you all being able to see, I'm going ahead and cutting the thread. And my magnets, by the way, just sit in the corner of my wall and floor where they meet. I have a fatigue mat where I'm walking, so they're just kind of, there's a little ledge in the back of that, and that's where they rest. You do not want them sitting in the middle of the floor because you definitely do not want to stub your toe on one of them. Ask me how I know this. Okay, and there's the end of our little quilt already. So once again, your questions are going to come up, but I'm just going to keep proceeding with straightening my batting, pulling out my quilt, and then basting around this final edge, okay? All right, let's see some questions while I talk. Becky, I love this red, white, and blue quilt, yet not in the patriotic style. True, there is patriotic elements in it, but it's not boldly that. There are little flags here and there and little stars and things like that. Marion Bishop, really cute quilt. I totally agree. And again, I said this earlier, but if you're a beginner sewer or maker of quilts, this is a great project. It's a nice size, not too huge and threatening, definitely not too complex. Shelley, what color thread are you using? Great question, Shelley. I'm using my new favorite neutral, and I'm using the Isacord brand, so it's 100% poly, and the Isacord number is 0184, I believe. I said that wrong one week. If you would look at it on the bobbin winder, Dave, that's the one there. It is just a really pale taupey silver, and remarkably, even on these white fabrics, it just looks like a very gentle shadow. It is incredible at blending between colors and whites or lights, and even the pale pink on the back. It just kind of almost picks them all up. It's great. B. Boyle, do you ever have the foot wander away from the ruler? Well, yes. Experience helps with that. You know, I'm just very aware now of having it always pushing a little bit against the ruler. But yeah, it still happens to me from time to time too. Any more questions? Marie, do you have anything that grips or grabs the fabric on the underside of the ruler? I don't. I know some other quilters do that. Certainly experiment with that if you find that that helps you. I've just over time figured out how much pressure I need to hold it in place for me. Karen, have you ever quilted a design and at the end not liked it? I don't think I've ever quilted one and hated it at the end. I've quilted, freehand edge to edge things and at the end thought, I don't love it, or I don't love the thread I chose. I have never undone a whole quilt. I just say, okay, I know why I didn't care for that. Moving on. I'll do something a little different next time. That's my philosophy. So, I do have some questions I ask myself before I choose a design, and I think that helps to avoid maybe some drastic missteps. Questions like, what type of person it's for, or what it's going to be used for, or what's the overall look I want, cuddly, cozy, or girlish, or contemporary, or, or. That all helps. Again, I'm stitching along with my fingers awfully close to the needle. If you're not comfortable doing this, by all means drop pins in at this point. It's a little bit like, I think, a little bit like a chef and a sharp knife, right? They know how to curve their fingers and how to hold them to keep them reliably away from the needle. I have never pierced my finger with a needle. So I did tell you this wasn't the only way, and maybe not even the right way. It's just my way. I'm taking care to make sure the seams are not pulling apart as I go over them. that's all too easy to do, and then it ends up being a little bit stretched and you end up with a little excess at the end. So I'm definitely taking care to make sure that those seams get under the hopper foot and don't push out ahead of it. And again, if you're not comfortable doing that with your fingertips, drop some pins in there first. And I could have made that stitching line up a little higher. It was pretty skimpy, but it is secure. It's holding. It's not going anywhere. And we've met up with the earlier part. That's it. It is all basted. Now occasionally when the ends of the fabric are not perfectly straight, I can't get these grippers on and I have to just use my single clamp, but I think I've got this one in. Not sure that you could even see what I was doing, but I bet you can envision it. There was just a little jog in the where the seam, the sides of the seam met. Okay, no magnets are needed this time. Everything is secure and ready to go. Let's take a couple questions while I get one more sip of water. Have we got questions?
Yes.
Oh, here they come.
Because I remember.
Jan, how long have you been quilting on a long arm? I got my first Lucy in February of 2015. Mickey, what kind of fatigue mat do you have? One that a friend gave me. That's all I know. It's, you know, it's kind of long and narrow. So it's just in my walking area here behind the long arm. That's all I know. Okay, let's get quilting. There is no rhyme or reason to why I keep starting on the right-hand side. I often base the right-hand side second, and that's where I am, and so I just keep going. It does not matter which side you start on, whether you're doing ruler work or whether you're doing a freehand design. I quilt in all directions. And again, I know I'm skipping over lines that I need to quilt, but I'm outlining these main boxes first, just because it helps me to keep on track, so I don't misquilt any lines. I'm curious if very many of you have had an opportunity or still are having an opportunity to attend any quilt shows this year. So I live in Spokane, Washington, and our annual show is in October. So I just finished this week getting my entries uploaded into their digital entry system. So I am really looking forward to that quilt show. One of my friends is the featured quilter, and I know it will be interesting. She is the master of embellished quilts. She does a lot of wool applique and tons of beading and embroidery and intricate little things. Just amazing work. To me, that is such a feeding and encouraging time to just have a couple days to explore what other people are doing and admire their work. I thoroughly enjoy attending quilt shows. Maybe chime into the comments if you have attended lots. I would love to know what your favorite is. I honestly have not over the years. I've never been to any of the major ones. I've only been to small local shows. So I'd love to know what some of your favorites are. Dave is correcting me, actually. I went to MQX one year, which was Machine Quilters Exposition. They are no longer in operation, but I did go there one year. That is true. Never done Houston or QuiltCon or Paducah or any of those. So yeah, what's your favorite? Where should I start looking for tickets to? Human hair that I sewed in there, and I'll just pull that out. We know it's not mine because it's about 6 inches long, and there are none of those on my head. This is pretty speedy, wouldn't you say? And of course it is not densely quilted. The little triplets of lines are about 1.25 inches, 1 3/8 apart. And then the open square that is between, let's have a look with our ruler here, then we can tell you properly. The little square that is between is about 2 3/4. I don't think I would want to go any larger than that, leaving an unquilted bit. But I'm okay with that amount of space. It's kind of a soft looking quilt, so I feel like that's in keeping with the feel of the project as a whole. Second guessing myself here if I got the right line. Yes, I missed one of the point to point of the big square. And I'm going to go back and do that right now. Again, just so I can keep track of these lines, that's important. Yep. Just double checking. Takes less time to double check than to undo. Now I'm triple checking. I'm going to pause at the end of this line and take any more questions that you have so that I can be answering them a little bit while I quilt the last few. Have we got any more questions coming in?
Lots of comments on the show, a few questions.
Okay, let's have the questions because we can maybe do the show discussions after. Probably easier with my glasses off. Janice, you said you bought your first Lucy in 2015. How many long arms have you had? This is number 2. Yeah. My first one was, I mean, they've both been used, but my first one was quite elderly. Oh, wow. Only the one question? Great. Okay, well, let's see some show comments then if we could. And we'll talk about quilt shows while I finish. Kathy, I'm going to AQS Quilt Show in Grand Rapids next week. Awesome. I'm sure that will be great. Sharon, one day I want to go to Paducah for their show. They set a high bar, don't they? Jane, I'm going to the Plano, Texas Quilt Show Friday. I've been to several shows this year so far. Awesome. And Dar, thanks for mentioning the WSQ show and our mutual friend. She does amazing work. She absolutely does. Becky, Utah just had a QuiltCon National Quilt Show in July this year. Our state Guild's show is in October. We have some national quilters come to that one. And don't you also have Garden of Quilts in Utah? Am I right? In September? Because I was kind of thinking about that one. And Sharon, I live in Texas. Houston Quilt Show, Dallas Quilt Guild Show in March, and North Texas Quilt Show representing 6 guilds in a couple of weeks. That's awesome. I dream of going to the Houston show, and one of these days I will. Betty, I've just installed channel locks on my Avante. Amazing. Aren't they nice? Yes, this is one of the features I love best about Lucy. Joan, did the owner of the quilt pick the intermittent crosshatch design in place of all over crosshatch, or was this suggested by you? She picked crosshatch, and I picked the intermittent one. And I hope she's happy with it. And Jane, watching on my TV and the quality is excellent. Good, I'm happy to hear that. You must be seeing me just about life size. Okay, just a few more lines, I believe. And to the lady who asked who picked the design, I hope it doesn't come across as though I'm trying to override the quilt owner's decision. I did make a judgment call, but this is not her personal quilt that I'm kind of messing around with. This is basically a shop sample. So everyone involved in it is kind of trying some new things, trying a new pattern, trying new fabrics. And I'm trying new cross-hatching. And I'm sure I will get feedback as well. And I'm good with that. I'm just going to buzz down here to the corner. I thought there was only one. Actually, there's several lines down here, but I'm still going to grab this one across the corner so that I don't forget it. It was such a little one and so easy to miss. I see just one more. And it's up this way. Nope, I'm wrong. I see the same line, but it kind of zigzags across, right? It starts right here. Now I've got it. Here's an example. Can we see this? You can't see it terribly well, but this little corner right here, the points don't match up, and I'm not picking on that at all. I just want you to see as I quilt over it, and as you look back behind it, that is completely unnoticeable. And I just wanted to show perfection is absolutely not necessary to make a beautiful quilt. And I believe I understood from the Fat Quarter Shop that it was kind of a novice sewist that made this, and good for her. She did a great job if that's the case. It was well pressed. It was flat and square. Very nicely done. Okay, I think that's it, but I am going to take one more look. No, I think that's good. I hope that they're really happy. I certainly am with this kind of uneven crosshatch. It ends up with a little 4-patch in the center of every one of these 5-inch blocks. Like, it just adds that little bit of interest, a little bit of detail that I think is really pretty. All right, any last comments before we go? And while Dave loads those, remember that these live and unscripteds are generally the first and third Friday of each month. Oh, right in the front. At 9 a.m. in the morning Pacific time. So today's is kind of a bonus episode, and wasn't it fun? But usually on the Friday mornings. And so I try and send out in my newsletter a couple days in advance what I'm working on and some of the topics that I'll be covering, so you can conclude if it's of interest to you. Lauren, if this quilt had an odd number of rows, I assume is what you mean, how would you quilt the last row to keep it in the same pattern? I can't visualize it. I would have still done my 2 rows, Lauren, right here, and I would have advanced again and done 1 row. They just would have been shorter zigzags, but exactly the same process. Sally, the gamble stitch regulator must be one of the quietest. It is fairly quiet, but also the mic that we've got is here on the side of my face, so you don't hear a ton of machine noise. You're hearing me. So we do that on purpose to try and keep the machine noise not annoying. Joan, any suggestions for ruler work for one who only has constant speed? And thanks, Dave, for producing this for us. I don't have any great suggestions, Joan, because I've always had a stitch regulator. Now, my friend Eva, who was on here earlier, she has done ruler work. It does mean that you have to stop every time you're pausing, like you literally have to stop the stitch, the needle motion. So I think it's a lot more time consuming, but I think that's kind of the key to it. And I think it probably takes getting used to, just like working without a stitch regulator in any sense, takes getting used to. But I'm sorry, I don't have any great earth-shattering tips for you. Nancy, as I watch you handle this ruler, I can see the benefit of the handle. I know you've mentioned the brand before. Would you mind telling us again? Absolutely. It's by A1. And again, we'll put some links right into the show notes. And that's an easy way to find the shop. That I purchase it from a private shop, husband and wife team, and I like to give them the business. So, Donna, I use a sit-down long arm machine, but some of your tips still are helpful. I'm so glad. I have to adjust some of your methods, but that's okay. I learn with every session I watch your quilting. I appreciate that, Donna. I started on a domestic machine too, but of course now, because I tend not to use it, I don't always stay current in both, but I'm glad you're finding that it translates for you. Eva, there she is. I like your take on doing the uneven cross-hatching using the piecing as your guidelines. It looks beautiful, and I love the fabric too. Dave, give me a mute for a sec. There's a cough coming on. Okay, we got the cough under control. Maybe. Here it comes again. There's going to be an end to this because I'm not... There is going to be an end to this because I'm not going to last very much longer. I did mention just briefly, someone was asking about the quilt behind me. It's not a published pattern. It was my own idea, and it has the ombre. You're seeing the lightest one on this end. It goes all the way down to a charcoal at the other end. Totally out of my scrap bin. I was just playing. So that's what that is. Joan, who is Eva with a machine similar to mine? So Eva Reimer, who just posted a comment, and Joan, Eva is in our Masterclass Facebook group, so you can fire a question to her there, and she'll chime in. Becky, we do have Garden of Quilts, and one that aligns with when the snow geese fly in. Oh, I love that. I'll have to look up more information on that one. That sounds awesome. Okay, looks like that's it for the comments. So, once again, like and subscribe if you would, and please, please share this with friends or other quilters that you think would be interested, or guilds or groups or what have you. I do these live and unscripted episodes first and third Friday of every month, generally at 9 a.m. in the morning, Pacific time. So this was a bonus one. I am so glad that you all joined me, and I will be sure and take some good close-up photos so you can get a real good look at some of this and the backing and so forth, and post those on social media over the next couple of days. So thanks a ton for joining me. Once again, I am Susan Smith, and I will catch you next time.